Lawyers of Reddit, what was the least defendable case ever brought to you? Not a lawyer, but a rhymer trades union representative. At the last company I worked, we had a great set of workers. My colleague was the head representative for the union at the time, whereas I was still learning to be a representative. Anyway, we had this electrician who'd worked at the company for 25 plus years. Really well respected, but his views are a little out there. My colleague had just got him back to work after a case of inappropriate workplace behavior, kissing an office member of staff on the cheek, where he was suspended for 6 months whilst investigations went ahead. He came back with a final written warning, meaning one more incident, and he was sacked. All his pension, benefits, gone 2 days. After he came back, me and my colleague got asked to come into a meeting regarding this employee. Got in the meeting, senior hours and the boss of the company are sat inside. They lay out new allegations. So, we have had a report that when working in a property, you went into the house when there was only a 14-year-old girl, and then proceeded to talk to her about sex, condoms and other obscene matters we won't mention. So we are just like, whoa, wait, what the heck? We need to talk to our colleague and find out what's happened here, and give him advice. Nope. Before we even had a chance to do that, the guy spoke up and went, yeah, I did. Nothing wrong with that. She's 14. She knows how to use a condom. She's from the area. That's all they know how to do. They have sex and get pregnant by 16. So I'm just talking to her about what she knows. Dude was in his late 50s. He should know better. Both me and my colleague just stunned. Like, why the fact did he just say that? Anyway, he got suspended and asked us to defend him because he says he did nothing wrong. We got the case file and evidence through, realized that there was actually fuck all we could do. He dug his grave, dug it a day after he returned to work. He lost everything, his house, pension, everything. No one would employ him as he was deemed too risky to take on, knowing they could have a potential sex scandal should he do it again. Luckily, I was on the other side of one of these ridiculous cases. I live in an area where liquor licenses are extremely valuable commodities. They can be transferred from one person to another, which is often easier than convincing a municipality to issue you a new one for your new bar/restaurant. My client was opening up a new restaurant and found some wackadoo who had a liquor license that he was not using. I believe his bar previously folded. He agreed to sell his license to my client for about $250,000. The contract had a minor notice provision, something like you have to send notice of whatever in 7 days. My client's former lawyer dropped the ball and sent it in 10 days. Now, the wackadoo received full payment, but decided that because this minor notice provision was breached, he was entitled to keep both the license and the money. There is a doctrine of law called material breach of contract, which, in a nutshell, means you can only sue for breach of contract if the breach materially impacts your contract rights. For example, if my client had failed to pay for the license, that would be a material breach of contract. But getting a notice document 3 days late, when full payment had already been made? Yes, it is a technical breach of the contract, but no court in the United States of America would deem that to be a material breach, and certainly no court would let the wackadoo keep the license and the money. So we sued the wackadoo, who represented himself. He fought okay for a pro se, but the judge of course ruled against him because his position was crazy. Wackadoo kept the money and my client got the license. An independent mortgage broker from a small town on the East Coast. One day, he just up and left without notifying his clients. Fast forward a few months later, and one of his former clients discovers significant mistakes in her residential mortgage paperwork that caused massive issues with the bank, costing thousands in legal fees to rectify. Naturally, she wants to recover damages. Only the broker can't be found. Office is boarded up for non-payment of rent. His house is up for sale, and nobody knows where he went. The only indication of his whereabouts was his Facebook profile. He was swimming with dolphins somewhere sunny with his teenage daughter, which infuriated the plaintiff. Fortunately, he paid his insurance up front, and it hadn't expired, so he would be defended by us through the insurer. When I finally got in touch with him after 2 months, he explained that he'd lost all interest in the profession about a year ago. Since then he took on clients or helped existing ones, but with basically zero financial background checks and absolutely no regard for the structure or timing of the transaction. He was rubber stamping everyone and everything. His work was so shoddy and his file management so poor that we had basically nothing to go on. He was dead to rights, and he didn't care at all. Then one day he declared bankruptcy, signed the house over to a trustee, and got a short-term visa to live in Australia, where his daughter was studying. We settled that one quickly as he had no intention of returning for trial, and we'd probably never be paid. There hasn't been an actual case yet, but I have an interesting story point. My mother works at a private school, specializing in additional help for kids with special needs, and there's a kid who she said a few months ago needed some type of medication, as he was causing too much trouble for his class teacher. The school said that, specifically without this medication, he is too disruptive, and would need to be sent to another school that specializes in special needs children. They got the medication, and everything was fine for several months. The parents then say to the people supplying their funding for this extra support, they still pay a lot of money every year for this kid to attend this school, but they get some government funding because their kid has special needs, that they were told their kid had to change school because the class couldn't handle them, and that they would need another $20,000 a year for the difference in school fees by sending him to a specialized school. Of course this gets fed back to the school, and then my mother. She talks to the head teacher and the kid's class teacher, who both say that the kid has been fine since taking this medication. This has been several months, remember, and neither of them had said anything about him having to move schools. Since before the medication point, my mother has to have a meeting with the government bursars, which originally would have just been them and the head teacher. But the kid's father insisted that he must be present, and that my mother was not allowed to speak to the bursars. Of course my mother says that's ridiculous, so he plans a private meeting to discuss the matter before they discuss it in front of the bursars, and then brings a lawyer to this meeting and says my mother isn't allowed to talk to the head teacher or class teacher about his kid without this lawyer having a record of what they say. My mother has since told me that the lawyer says it is unreasonable to do this, and that as it is, there is no actual case for this parent to get the additional funds. She, the lawyer, is just there to catch a slip up in what my mother says. I'm not a lawyer, but my mother was in a lawsuit against her roommate and the roommate lost horribly. My mother, the nice and kind woman that she was, heard a family member's mother was going to be homeless. She was a bit crazy, which later turns to really crazy, and wasn't allowed to be on the premises of her daughter's apartment complex for legal reasons. She takes her in, gives her the spare room. My mother worked as a hospice worker and stayed 4 nights a week at her client's home. She told her new roommate, who had nothing but a verbal consent, to stay in her home, so no legal paperwork, no bills under her name, nothing but whatever random mail was sent to the roommate. Was told that she could stay, live there, rent and bill free, as long as she cared for the pets and house. While my mom worked. This lady had changed locks, done hard drugs, betrayed the house, stole items, the list goes on, but I'll cut it here to save a read. Well, my mother tells her she needs to leave and gives her over a month's notice to vacate her property. She did not, and after dozens of 911 calls and a legal notice to vacate after several trips to the local sheriff's office for help, as the roommate had squatters' rights, we managed to get her out and move on to court, as she had assaulted several of us. Between telling her to leave and her leaving, she represents herself and my mother, myself and my then girlfriend with my mother's lawyer arrive. The lady was offered first speaking, and she tried to lay out this massive defense. I have a copy of the lease, as well as several other documents making it illegal to remove me from this home. As well, I want to file charges against them for B&E, as well as verbal assault. The judge looks to us, and we give them our statements, as well as all the videos we had recorded of us entering and confronting the woman on this issue, and she was the only one screaming, cursing, and so on. As well, my mother and I, along with the home's actual owner, provide the actual lease. I signed on as a co-signer, though I did not live in the house, and all of which failed to have the roommate's signature on it. The charges on us were dropped almost immediately. She was charged with squatting, forging of legal documents, slander and a few others I can't recall offhand. We were granted restraining orders against her. As well, she had to pay all the fines of the court and spent just over a year in jail. Sorry for a long one, but I hope someone enjoyed reading this. Not a lawyer her, but a property manager. I had to go to the discovery because a lady tripped over a portable sign leg, fell, and broke her ankle point next door. This was in the summer a couple of years ago when she fell and broke her ankle in the parking lot next door. She dragged herself over about 10 or 12 feet from where she fell beside the sign to the grassy patch on my boss property next door. Read that again. Really? She and her lawyer took the city for allowing the sign maker, the landlord of the property next door, the bar owner that had the sign put in, and me. I repped my landlord at discovery. Before trial, her lawyer kept on asking me all these hypothetical questions, trying to pin some blame on me / my boss, like if the sign was on or over the property line. Why did you not do anything about it? So every time I would answer with a hypothetical answer. Literally saying, well, since you are asking a hypothetical question, I can only give a hypothetical answer that if the sign was on or over the property, which I will repeat it wasn't being 12 feet away, then possibly one of the choices I would have made would be something like have it moved back over to the adjacent property. This went on for 45 minutes straight. I'm getting paid, so I ain't a bit worried. The insurance company supplied a lawyer who really didn't do anything for me and my boss. The lady's lawyer was turning red in the face and even raised his voice at me a couple of times, unsatisfied with my answer. I even threw gas on the fire, saying, I answered your question. I do not appreciate your raising your voice at me because of that. All these lawyers there were sitting there face palming and smirking off on the side as this was happening. Point at the end of my part of discovery, the lawyers meet. Me and my lawyer leave after their 5-minute meeting. My insurance supplied lawyer says to me that all the lawyers, including the city's lawyer, said to cut me loose as I / my boss / the land has nothing to do with the case. The lady's lawyer flat out refused. They have every right to do so. It took a little more than 14 months after discovery to get to trial, and just before the trial started, in the hallway, the lady's lawyer cuts me loose. My lawyer is not happy. Even though that stupid lawyer kept the meter running for the lawyer and the insurance company, it wasn't very professional. I called up the insurance company on behalf of my boss and thanked them for the lawyer and talked to one of their in-house legal team. I ended up telling her what happened, how patient my lawyer was in all this. He didn't even bother to participate in the discovery against the lady, knowing there wasn't any questions he could ask other than, where did you fall? But that was asked by each of the other lawyers already, and who the lawyer was who kept this stupidity up. She said she would have to confirm it with my provided lawyer, but she said when this happens, that the insurance company would take this into consideration, and in the future, would not send any future business the annoying lawyer's way. Edit 1. For perspective, the lady in her mid-70s was looking for a total of $6.25 million from the city. Sign maker, other landlord, and bar owner. The portion aimed at my landlord was $750,000. Criminal defense attorney here. I'd say 85% or so of my clients are, without question, guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. The keys for their cases are determining 1. Whether I can have any evidence excluded, for instance via the 4th or 5th Amendment, in which case they could still potentially win at trial, and 2. What the best possible plea deal could be. It would be hard to name one case that was not defendable, because every week or so I get a new client who was at fault in an accident, totaled their car, and then had a 15 or higher blood alcohol concentration. I do have one story from my civil litigation days about a pro se defendant was representing himself without an attorney after being sued, who wanted a trial in an eviction action. My first ever civil trial, I was representing the plaintiff who wanted to evict the defendant from her property for non-payment of rent. After presenting my case, the judge asked the defendant to present his evidence. The defendant replied, "Huh." The judge said, "Now is your turn to present your case." The defendant said, "I don't understand." The judge leans over the bench and asks, "Why are you here?" The defendant said, "Oh yeah, right." The defendant then went on a 30-minute tangent, literally 30 minutes, about all sorts of things like how he only parks his car so he can see where he is going when he pulls out because that was taught when he was in the military. And about how he has a whole ton of friends and they love making barbecue. I could have objected to relevance, which is actually a pretty rare opportunity, but the more he talked, the more the judge disliked him. After 30 minutes the judge finally asked about the rent. The defendant says, "Oh yeah, I'm not trying to debate that I didn't pay it. That's how I won my first civil trial." I don't totally know how accurate this story is. It's been a few years and the details are a bit fuzzy, so here's the bullet points. Girl and guy I went to HS with have a kid. Child lives with mother. Couple begins using heroin together but nobody was aware of this at the time. Girl gets into fight with mother. Mother calls police and says 2.5 years old granddaughter told her she was getting molested by parents and they were producing child pornography. Police raid house. Find drug evidence, arrest couple. Police interrogate girl. Falsely claim daughter told them she was getting molested. Girl, while addicted to drugs and not understanding the situation, but trying to do what's right, tells police, "If that's what my daughter says happened then I believe her and stand by her." All without an attorney. Present police use that as confession. Girl's mother, realizing what she's done, recanted her statements and claims police find no evidence of child pornography. 2 rap kits on daughter, find no evidence of sexual activity. Boyfriend accepts plea deal. DA proceeds in prosecuting girl using confession and boyfriend's plea as evidence. Public defender interviews myself and my best friend, girl's best friend, as character witnesses. Stresses how much they believe girl's testimony that daughter was never molested, but have no choice but to advise plea of 5 years vs fight charges and receive 20 years. Girl accepts plea for 5 years and register as such offender. Daughter is in grandmother's accuser's custody and her husband, who also has 2 4-year-old twin daughters from previous relationship. 6mo after plea. Grandmother's husband's 2 daughters are taken to hospital from preschool, both with signs of being molested after teachers notice vaginal bleeding through their pants. Police unable to find who molested daughters. Close investigation. Girl remains in prison still. Point: I'm not trying to defend or accuse any party in this example. This is a shitty situation on every front. All parties involved made grave errors that only allowed this to snowball. Sure, this whole thing started with the grandmother. While I totally believe her claims were totally fabricated, the parents' drug use was totally inexcusable, especially with a small child involved. Their troubles only compounded by not knowing their rights, and the person that pays the largest price of all is a sweet 2.5-year-old that has been through more shit in the first years of her life than most go through in 30 years. Again, I'm not excusing the parents' drug use, but the mother was a functioning addict. Nobody knew she was using. All accounts would have suggested she had her shit together and was a responsible parent. I'm a recovering, functioning addict myself and can typically smell the mere thought of drug use from a mile away, and I was totally oblivious to her drug use. While I do believe it was a blessing that the daughter was removed from her mother's drug use, this was the wrong way, and I'm certain was far more traumatizing to the poor girl than just about anything else could have been. I hate kids, truly, and yet my heart breaks for the poor kid and her mother every time I think about it. Stupidity all around. Not a lawyer, but my parents had a pretty messy divorce and a custody battle over my sister and I. I was 12, she was 8. Basically my mum kept her affair secret for 2 years. Then my dad found out, and my mum ran away with my sister and dad was like, what the fuck, and naturally tried to find us. We were in hiding for about 2 weeks before the cops found us and forced us to do things the legal way. Unfortunately, the court system in my country is extremely biased towards women, so even though my father, with no criminal record, 2 houses which he owned, and a stable job, lost the custody battle against my mother, who had a criminal record, didn't have anywhere for us to live, and didn't have a job. She had primary custody, so we only got to see our dad every second weekend, which was awful. Sometimes she'd let us go, have dinner there during the week, which was nice. It was kinda stupid that she never let us see him though, because he literally got a house 2 blocks away from us, literally a 5-minute walk, so he could see us. Sheet was whack for 10 months. Worst 10 months of my life for sure. My mum was on some pretty hardcore stuff, and in the end, planned out my father's murder, because she wanted him out of our lives, because he never stopped fighting for my sister and I. She wanted to break up with her abusive boyfriend, the one she had an affair with, so she had convinced him to murder my father, and then she was gonna turn him in for killing him. Two birds with one stone. Anyways, they obviously failed. Both went to jail. My father finally won full custody. Funny thing was, they were still legally married. In my country, you have to be living separately for 2 years before you can legally divorce, even if one partner had an affair or committed adultery. So my parents were technically married for 3 years after they split, because they hadn't documented their living arrangements, despite it being pretty obvious through the court. Anyways, it's been over 5 years since all that. Still living with my dad. Don't speak to my mum. Haven't seen or heard of her psycho ex-boyfriend since. Life's good. Not a lawyer, but when I had my jury duty term, a case I got put on the jury for was a guy charged with trespass whose whole defense was that the guy who banned him did not have the authority to ban him. The guy doing security for the apartment complex where this happened was an off-duty cop who issued an informal ban. The formal ban came from the manager of the apartment complex, who got his address from the person the defendant had originally visiting. He got charged with trespass. When he came back a few weeks later, the off-duty cop only had him arrested because he ran when he realized the cop saw him. On the stand, the cop said he was going to just let it go, but the guy ran from him, and you don't get to do that. Then, the defendant's lawyer was this stereotype of a bad public defender, like you would see on Law & Order. Her whole line of questioning for the cop consisted of saying, "You just don't like my client, don't you?" Because it turned out that coincidentally he had arrested the guy once before a few years prior to this, and trying to trick the cop into saying the defendant wasn't breaking the law by asking, besides trespass, was my client breaking any laws? Seriously, you dumb bitch, you admitted your client was breaking the law in your own question. What the fuck? The cop kept it cool and said he was breaking the law by being there. He was trespassing. Then she kept asking the current property manager, the manager at the time of the incident no longer worked there, what the policy for trespass was at the time of the incident, even though she only worked there for 3 months and this incident had occurred over a year and a half earlier. In the end, I got relieved before deliberation, because I was the alternate juror as it turned out. But I got called back for another trial about a week later, and I found out from one of the other jurors that they convicted the guy. If he had just plead guilty from the start, he would have been done with his sentence long before that. I have a relative who's a lawyer. She worked for a hospital on a wrongful life case that was pretty miserable. Plaintiff had given birth to a baby with very severe congenital deformities. Plaintiff sued every health professional she saw while pregnant, claiming that if they had told her about the deformities, she would have aborted. A quick look at medical records shows that the plaintiff never really pursued prenatal care. She went to a local emergency room very early in her pregnancy to get a pregnancy test, apparently common in impoverished communities. And she returned to that same med a month later with abdominal pain. The ED doctor did an ultrasound on her belly and determined the fetus was not in distress, but he did not do a thorough exam because he wanted to figure out where the belly pain was coming from, not do an organ scan like an OB would. But she sued that hospital. Then she was arrested for check fraud and saw a physician in jail, but she didn't tell that doc about her pregnancy, so he didn't do an ultrasound at all. But she sued whoever provides that healthcare, the jail, maybe. Just a sad case that the hospital won handily.